All right, all right.
Okay. Second question was
Okay, y'all, let's go.
All right, so if you plan the date recently for your spouse and your spouse can name the time that you planned the date, then you get a point. Okay? And then the next question was, when was the last time you gave your spouse a real kiss? Anybody said today? A few months ago. Anybody last week? No. Last week? Today? All right. You guys got 4 points right now? You guys got 4 points right now? You guys got 3 points?
How many points we got?
Okay.
How many points we got?
Keep a tally of your points. You got 4 points, 3 points. Okay, here we go, ladies, your turn. Y'all get back now.
Yeah.
All right, ladies, hold up real quick. Ladies, this is for you. When was the last time you complimented, showed appreciation, or boosted up your husband? Basically, when did you stroke his ego? Second question. When was the last time you had on something sexy when your husband came home after a hard day?
And don't tell me you don't know what sexy is.
I see them faces.
Hey, well, what if y'all work two different shifts?
We work different shifts. I used to work 2:30 to 11. How many times do you give your husband a real kiss before he leaves the house?
A real, what's considered a real kiss?
You know what a real kiss is.
I mean,
When you start.
not the one you kiss your kids.
Right.
My last question, ladies. How long has it been since you had pillow talk with your husband about just you two? Not the kids, not work, just you two. When was the last time you had pillow talk with your husband about just you two?
So that time you were intimacy.
Right.
I'm gonna burn mine.
All right, so we're going over the first question again for the lady. Put them up. When was the last time you complimented, showed appreciation, or boosted up your husband? What we got? Everybody said today? This mom, you said yesterday?
I said today.
Every day.
I said today.
What he said? What he said?
Last year.
Anybody got a point for that? Next question.
Top of this, pretty low.
Next question. When was the last time you had something sexy when your husband got home? Ladies. We need to see them answers, ladies. Here's the It's a method to all of it. All right. Ladies, how many times do you give your husband a real kiss before he leaves the house? Anybody quit today? Last week? Last month? All right. Let's get to the last question. Last question. How long has it been since you had a pillow talk with your husband about just you two? Not the kids, not work. Yesterday, what you put on, brother? Because you looking like.
She said, what money? Well, yeah, that's all. You took that.
Pillow talk? When you lay it down, his head on the pillow, yours, and y'all talking, you're not talking about, the kids or, the job, just us.
But I mean, what if you do that in a different, you do that in the evening on the couch?
Wherever that position, wherever y'all want. So real quick, this is yeah.
Okay, so counting up. Anybody got 8 points?
No.
Anybody got 7 points?
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
We got time. So we got a bonus question. Come on, guys. Y'all can. Okay.
Here's the bonus question.
Well, we got to do one for everybody and then one for y'all to win prize.
We just run the singles out.
What is your spouse's favorite song? Ooh.
Nah, don't tell her.
Right. All right, let's go. Okay. What is your spouse's favorite Okay, all right, so y'all are the strangest from Austin, come in here. Okay, well, you like your mama. And you'll see why it's relevant. You'll see why it's relevant. Last question for everybody.
On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate your partner's intimacy level?
Now you're ready
1
on
through
your
10.
partner.
What's your partner's intimacy level? 1 to 10.
All right. Feeling good.
Excellent.
Anybody say zero?
Question.
One?
No, this people have a question.
Yes, sir.
Are we talking about the thought process or the actions? The action?
What does intimacy mean to you?
We're gonna talk about what intimacy means.
Come on,
So as you understand it now, rate what you feel intimacy is for you. Rate your partner. You know what your needs are. Last, two. I got two. Three.
Don't get them, man.
See, I don't believe some of y'all. Y'all, none of y'all got some of these questions right. Y'all talking about like, okay, anybody got 10? Anybody rate their partner 10? Your partner 10 intimacy? 10? 10? 10? All right, okay. You rate your partner 10.
So real quick, that was a nice little game, but one of the reasons why we came up with that as an icebreaker is because, as we saw, sometimes we don't know as much as we think we know. Or we may be lacking in some areas, but we don't discuss them and we don't talk about it. Like the first question about when was the last time a man had on something sexy? I mean, my wife said, I need you to wear something sexy. I'm like, what? Like, what you mean? But as men, who teaches us that there's this thing that we can wear that's sexy and appealing to a woman that doesn't take away who we are as a man? Right? So I told her, I don't like nothing sexy. I didn't even wear cologne. I didn't even like cologne. But I learned because she brought it to my attention. So this forum is to bring things to your attention. Because when we were reading what Pastor Brenda was explaining, intimacy into me, sometimes you don't see that person that was with. When we said, when was the last time you kissed your spouse? And some of the reactions that I got. But what if your spouse want that? But didn't say nothing for a whole year or a whole month. And now you walking around thinking you're doing everything right. She's miserable or vice versa. So this is a way where we better understand our spouses. So that's where we came up with the concept of intimacy, because intimacy for men and intimacy for women can be totally different. And so what we're gonna do is give y'all, we're gonna give you a definition of what intimacy means on the 3 different levels, and then you'll be able to decipher and see what it means to you. So now you can walk away and say, you know what, man, I look at intimacy totally different.
And I think that, like Jerome was saying, because we all have our different impressions or how we grew up about it, some of you may not have ever even seen intimacy in your home, so you don't even know how to be intimate. And like Priscilla was saying earlier, is what lens are you looking out of to determine if you're being intimate with your partner? You know, you've seen the book, The 5 Love Languages. If somebody asks you today, you'll say, oh, I know what my language is. Mine is touch, or mine is acts of service. So if you know your love language, how come you don't know your intimacy language? What lens are you looking at? Are you looking at a contact lens? Are you looking at a bifocal? Do you have blurred vision? Are your eyes dilated and you can't even see what your partner's intimacy level is? What is your partner's intimacy love language? And I think that's something that we need to talk about. So we know that there's physical intimacy. We all know what that is. You know, physical. There's mental intimacy. That's just your relationship with your partner. And then there's emotional intimacy, an even deeper level of intimacy. So my question is, and anybody can raise their hand and answer this question, how do you define intimacy? In your relationship, how do you define intimacy? What's intimacy to you?
This is where you participate.
Intimacy, how do you define it? Intimacy.
Right here.
Yes, ma'am.
I think it's the level of closeness between the 2 of you in all those areas. So how close are you physically, how close are you emotionally, and,
How do you define it? What is intimacy to you?
I think it's just how do you mesh together? How close are you?
How close are you? So
And it's in all the areas. The physical part, the emotional part, in all those areas, how close are you? That's the level of your.
Yeah, I think there's a Greek word, it's koinonia. You talked about the closeness, the relationship, the fellowship, that you get when we were talking about God in that instance, but it relates to us as well. Anybody else? Intimacy.
I think it's more the point, for me, my perception is warm. Like, you know, like it's like you guys been 30 years, 20 years and stuff like that. When you first date, you're trying to impress the person. So it's like, how can I impress you? We just sitting here in the bed, we're not having sex or anything, but I'm trying to flirt with you to get you to be like, I like you.
Y'all in there, y'all in this.
But I think it's that just trying to impress that person and connect with that person to get that childish love back.
Seasons. We're gonna go through seasons of intimacy. We're gonna talk about that. That's an outstanding point. Anybody else? Bishop?
Well, no, I think it's a level of oneness. Connections, you know, connecting on multiple levels.
Yes, sir.
You know, and in the midst of that, you feel safe.
Right, so I want to ask, and I need an answer from one of the fellows. You know, for us, what does that look like? Intimacy, especially if no one taught you what intimacy was, other than a physical act. Like, what does it mean to you? Because the first thing women think, maybe men only know how to deal in a physical intimacy. So we all know that our ladies, our wives, they want us to sit down with them, they want us to go to the mall with them, and those things. So that might be intimacy for them because we're spending time. We may want the same thing, but we don't communicate that in a way because it doesn't seem like that's what men are supposed to want. We're supposed to be the ones who want the physical intimacy, but for you, and I know it's someone in there who intimacy matter more than just physical, so if you don't mind sharing that, that's what we're looking for.
Actually, just listening, not just hearing me speak, listening to what I'm saying. That's big. I mean, listening and understanding and actually engaging and listening. And that's our pillow talk usually. We just listen, talking about whatever and just engaging and listening and hearing what I'm saying.
Listening to hear, not to respond.
Exactly, just.
And why is that important, what he just said? Because at some point, physically, all of us in here are not gonna be able to meet the needs of our spouse, right? That's just how it is. So that balance of emotional and mental is way more important than the physical. And I think for us as men, we can, my wife and I, we talk all the time, like, I love being under her. I don't care if people say, oh, you do that. Because guess what, when I'm sick or whatever, my wife is gonna be there for me. I'm not looking for no physical need. I may need her just to hug me. We don't talk like that as men because sometimes we feel like, oh, that's soft. If your boys hear you talk like that. But the reality, your boys ain't there with you at night when you're not feeling good and your wife gotta rub your feet, or rub your back, or cook your food. So these things that we're talking about is so important, but these discussions go hidden. We talk about sports, politics, everything else, but when it comes to this, and I was the one who wrote that question earlier about men and not talking, because I was one of those men who wouldn't talk in front of certain people because I didn't want people to know or identify with me what I had going on. Because, we tough, we supposed to be tough. But there's so many men right now in America that's struggling.
Wearing masks.
Wearing masks.
Before we need to wear masks.
So this is what this,
So I was just gonna add on, let me see, man. I mean, I need my wife, I'm just giving an example, to get me intimately, like Bishop said, on multiple different levels throughout the day. Right, until 9 and 10 o'clock, and you throw some Luther Vandross or whoever it is.
right,
I'm not there yet. Right? And so that's almost like a non-starter. It should be a day throughout the day.
We always say it starts in the morning, and like he just said, it's not always about the bedroom, but to have, physical, loving touches that starts in the morning. When you're working all day and by the time you get to the room, you're tired. So it always starts in the morning.
I want to be thinking about her at 9 a.m. when I'm at the job, and then at lunchtime and all that type of stuff. So when I get home, then all that.
So my wife and I, she worked 7 to 5, and my shift was 2:30 to 11. So if you look at those hours, it's not really a whole lot of time. But on my way to work, I spoke to her. When I got a break, I called her. On my way home, and I had to ride an hour and 15 minutes home every day, there and back. So our intimate time was really when I was on the road. So now, even if she's tired physically, right? As you said, that during the day sets the mood for later. Because man, we just expect our women to be like this, but physically sometimes they're tired. However, when you start in the morning with a text, with an email, with the note, with the card, out of the blue, she's not as tired as she used to be.
So it didn't just happen on its own. You were intentional.
Absolutely. Intentional. Like the thing, people say that to us, oh, you guys only been married 3 years, and so, you're in the new USA, and I was like, the new USA is every day that you make it. Like, if you want to stay there, you can stay there, you don't have to listen to society. So we do things daily so that we don't listen to what society says, because society will tell you, oh, once you do past 5 years, you're not gonna be doing this and that. But if you're doing something every day, you don't gotta worry about later, because you used to doing it. But when you don't do it, 2 years go by, and your wife looking at you like, when you gonna take this over?
And on another note, some people, your spouse may have different needs than yours. One of you may be super affectionate, and the other one be like, get on out of here, because that intimacy level It's something other than closeness, affection, petting, you know, when they have a different, intimacy means something totally different to them. But because we don't talk about it back and we don't share it, and like the brother was saying, we talk about it in the beginning. Because you're trying to find out what turned that person on and, you know, what keeps them hot and heavy, you know, we don't talk about the 4 seasons. You know, but you have to at least have the conversation and have the discussion with your partner about what you need emotionally. If you don't know what intimacy is at this point, then it's time to have a conversation. When you go home, yes, ma'am.
I'd like to interject with that when you're spot on with it, and it just kind of came to me, you know, it's just like we were talking about earlier. It's intentional and checking in, because it changes. You know, when you guys were whispering little nothings in each other's ears and you guys were talking about those things, why does it have to stop? You know, life happens, so that's why it's so important to check in. We did a little activity of looking into each other's eyes, you know, into your partner's eyes at the end. And if you notice, y'all started talking. And I didn't even tell you to ask them anything, you just started, and you know, no matter what it was. And so just imagine if you did that. A part of your pillow talk would be to roll over and stare at them. And then like, what's happening? You check it in. And then it starts laughing, and stop taking it so seriously. If you continue to do that and stay in your honeymoon period, then you gonna make this. This is gonna happen. You know, it's gonna be even better. All the time, okay.
Because it's the springtime, like you know, brother was saying here, when you first get to know each other, everything is blooming, you know, it's a season of exploration. You know, everything is blooming, you know, you can't sleep, you can't eat, you're talking on the phone for hours at a time. Now you like texting. I don't even know that. But your relationship is blooming. The honeymoon phase, as you call it. Now, do we expect everyone to stay in that state? Of course not. You've been married any length of time, there's just no way that you're gonna stay in that. I got butterflies every time I see you. You know, you should get butterflies sometimes. But your relationship is blooming. Does anybody have anything to say about that season? That spring season, what does that mean to you? What was it like in your relationship? Yes, it's different now. Oh, I'm sorry.
One of the things that, for us, I had to learn, we're steadily learning each other. And his love language, intimacy level is different from mine. But we had to get into some deep discussions, like, do you know what it's like to be a husband? Do you know what you have to do as a, you know, and his whole thing, he grew up in the country. He didn't have, they said, take care of your family, that's how you take care of that house. And I was like, you it's more than that. You have to be clear and who I am. It's like, I have to make you into you. And over the years, I find that it's getting better of communicating. And I'm not home all the time. But when I find that he's talking to me more, like, I did that. I mean, they're like going back and forth, and it's a daily reaction that makes us stronger. Even when we butt heads, it still makes us stronger because we're trying to understand each other.
Anybody else, springtime? Your relationship, what was it like?
No, I was gonna say, you know, like, for me, I didn't grow up in a household where your parents tell you, I love you, you know, and so that had to become a learned behavior when I met him, because he's more of the physical, you know, hold your hand and open the car door. And so it took a while for me to get there. And then when we make those calls in the morning to see how, you know, you just love you, I love you, I love you from morning, afternoon, and his drive home, And we do that a lot of times on the drive home because you don't want to tell your whole work what happened today, things that, upset you because now they messed up the mood, You're like, okay, where we go from here now?
Yeah, so I think, it's so important what you said about when we get complacent. And my husband and I, Jerome and I, just had the same, issue a couple weeks ago about when you hang up the phone, they love you, okay, love you, bye. Love you. It's not I love you, just love you, bye. So it's just like, hey, love you, bye. You know what I mean? We got complacent. Or maybe he wasn't wearing something sexy, or whatever, or I wasn't, so we had that conversation with each other. But in the springtime of your relationship and intimacy, that's not an issue. Because everybody's got their representative, you want to act like you're romantic and affectionate, and that's what you do in the springtime.
You turned up.
Yeah. Turned up.
Where do you want? It's that Bill saying, I think you can't stop.
Come on now. Yes, ma'am.
I was gonna say, our springtime was us just talking. We used to sit and talk on the phone for hours and hours, and before we knew it, it was like 2:00 in the morning, or it was just constant communication, and us just talking and talking and talking.
Even when you didn't have nothing to say, you were saying, what you thinking about?
You.
Well, then you say,
You tired? No, I ain't tired.
You ain't got nothing.
I ain't tired.
Did you have to input? Did you have to? Oh, okay.
So Jeff and I, we were both married before. But coming into this marriage, the things that did not work in our previous marriage before we married, we sat and we talked about those things, that what we were not going to bring into this marriage. We work together. 80% of the time, we were in the same career field, we work together. We go to church together, one don't have to pull the other one, so that's, and then when we get home, we touchy-feely at work, and everybody knows that they tell us we just go get a room. And so we exemplified that in front of our kids. So, so we showed them, because as you were saying, we were not shown that as we were growing up in a house full of 9 kids, 7 kids, whatever it might be, mom and dad working different hours, dad working, and mom's at home with the kids. So the things that, what we knew that wasn't well for me, we have to speak, that was not good for me that I saw, those generational things that I did not like back then, I took it and I turned it around. I did not look at anybody else's marriage. We focused, I can say that we focused on us. There's a lot of things that we like, and we just sit at home, we hold hands, I mean, it doesn't have to be about, making love, sex, it's not about that. It's about just creating an atmosphere, for us. Because once the kids are gone, we want to have that foundation of love, having Christ in our life, that love, that we can just push and persevere through whatever storm that might come our way. But, shut up. And I call him boy and he called me girl. So, it's not all that making love all the time. It's the smallest thing, is the things that matters to us. We hold hands, we peck all the time, it's.
Right.
So I just want to physical. Yeah.
So you move past, so when you move past spring, you're not going back to spring. Because your relationship is already blooming and you pass that stage. So then you go into summer. And during summertime, when you high and heavy, everything is high and heavy, okay? Your love language is physical touch at that point. So your intimacy level is new, is fresh, you just got married or whatever. So you are, making out regularly, physical touch regularly, spending time regularly. It matters to see that person, how they feel, what they think. Your intimacy is up here. But then what happens when you get to fall?
What happens in your relationship? In the fall season?
So just think about fall metaphorically for what happens, right? The leaves start to change, they fall off. The trees look different. Sometimes in our relationship, the same thing happened. We had tree that the leaves fell off. We've forgotten that intimacy, that love, because in the spring we was joyful, summer we was hot, and now we come in the third quarter. You know how teams act? They come out at halftime, they might not want to hear the coach's speech, or the team got them down 20 and they gave up. Third quarter come, the game is over, and got blown out by 30.
And the third quarter in the fall season could be your life. Now you got kids, you working, tired.
Oh.
Your body change, for women, our body change. Yeah, when you met us, we were 36, 24, 36. We had them all together. There we we don't feel as sexy. We just don't feel the way we felt, in the summer and the spring. So now, subconsciously.
And that doesn't mean that you don't love your spouse more or less. Sometimes physically you're just worn out, right? So what happens in remote control? When the batteries don't work no more, what you gotta do? Change the battery. Sometimes we gotta change it up. If you're struggling in some area, my wife we had this argument. She was like, I want to go somewhere other than just going to get some wings and shit. Like, I want to go out on a date at least once a month. Like, looking like, I'm about to go spend all of this money on some food I don't like. Men, y'all hear me, right? But, so we had that conversation, but then I had to look at it. She didn't care about us going out to eat. It was just something she just wanted us to spend time together. But the first thing I thought about was how much money are we gonna be spending on food I don't like, right? But then I thought there's some things that I enjoy that she may not like that she does. So that's where that balance comes in, right? But there's times in our life where we have to recharge our batteries. All right. And some of us sometimes we stick in our charges into an outlet that has no power. No power. None.
And that outlet can be your friends that talk too much.
All right. It might be social media. You enjoy more likes than the like you get at home. Right.
That's Photoshop. Looking at other relationships, you had those sharing. That relationship is Photoshop.
And this is what I want. And this is one thing about the fall season, right? One thing about the fall season, we know winter comes next, right? We know it's cold in the winter, right? And we do not want to be in the house when it's real cold. Fellas, y'all know what I'm talking about. Don't turn the other way. Y'all know what I'm talking about. You don't want her to be upstairs and you downstairs and she's like, she ain't telling you, but she's telling you, don't even come up here. Don't even come up here. I'll throw the covers down. Right now, we're just not doing it. Right? So the fall season is that transition where we lose that luster. And it can happen just like that. I mean, I thought I was doing, I do a lot for my wife. I try to be attentive to her needs. But I might go a week and I just tired from work. I started a new job. I'm working 12 hours versus the 8 I used to. And I just don't got the energy. So she's looking at me like, oh, this is what it's about now? So, and you can get complacent, right? Without even knowing. But if you don't talk, if you don't communicate, then how do you know to fix something that's broken? We think it's fixed. Men especially, we'll walk around like everything's fine. Everything's good. And the woman is like, she got a whole list of something. So conversation comes. She ain't saying that right now. Conversation comes. You're gonna be looking like you don't want this.
She got every issue on layaway.
Man.
We can run all the things down. So intimacy is so much more than just a physical thing. You know what I mean? Intimacy is a conversation, it's a quality time, it's a physical touch, it's so much more. So we have got to realize that we're not gonna stay in spring, that we're gonna have that summertime, but you wanna oscillate between summer and fall. Because when you get to winter, like Jerome was saying, it's cold.
It's cold out there.
Yes,
Can I
sir.
interject there?
Yes,
Just a
sir.
second? I think the conversation piece, and as Christina said, check-in is very important across the season.
Yeah.
Right.
And that helps to keep you out of winter. If you
Right.
know how to check in. And it calls for sacrifice. You know, there's some days that last night I came home, I was tired because we've been eating baked chicken all night.
Oh, man.
My wife had cooked all day, she was tired, kitchen was a mess. And, you know, I could have gotten an attitude, but I came home, kitchen's a mess. I went, put my pajamas on, which is not so sexy. But well, anyhow, let me keep it moving. But then I thought, I said, you know what, she's tired, I'm tired. It's gonna take me 20, 25 minutes to knock this out, it's a done deal. And it calls for sacrifice, to keep that going. I'm kind of reminded of a couple years ago that I was TDY to Illinois, and the brother called me in a panic, and he said, hey man, I need to talk to you. And so I went over to his house. He said, I came home, and I saw a picture missing off the wall, and so I thought it fell behind behind the cadenza, and I went to go check, and it was there, and then I looked around, and everything was gone. And he said, me and my wife was intimate that morning, but when I got home, everything was gone. She had packed up, and she was out. And he had no idea that he was living in the winter.
In the winter, no cold.
Yeah, with no cold. And everything was gone. And so that whole season that I was there in training, I spent, pulling them together and having conversations and so on and so forth. And they did eventually come back together. They were talking on the phone again all night and all this other kind of stuff. But had they been doing that all along, it wouldn't have got to the point to where it was. And all it was some felt needs that were not being met. And maybe he knew and maybe he didn't, maybe he wasn't listening. But when I sit down with couples and talk to them about check-ins and conversations and I feel statements and those types of things, it sounds corny. But these are the things that you have to implement in order to keep your relationship fresh. And so, it's very important.
I think Paulette said, create an environment where you feel safe enough to tell your partner how you really feel without you going off into on a tangent. If I'm telling you how I feel, then it should matter to you to listen. And if it doesn't, then that's not a safe environment. So I'm holding it, like Bishop said, for an extended period of time, and then it blows up, and a relationship that could have been salvaged or an issue, not just intimacy, whatever the issue is, that we could have taken care of in the spring and summertime. Now we're in the winter. We're in the winter.
It's cold.
I got like some insight to that also as that scenario is going about, he didn't know he was in winter. Once again, I'm gonna use that scenario, those glasses, you were seeing what you wanted to see. And when the writing was on the wall, no one just walks out. You just don't walk out. I mean, if some of us have had relationships before, we married, right? Or before we didn't become engaged or in a relationship, and nothing's a surprise. We just choose to see it or not. And so I don't know what happened. I've had clients tell me, I still don't know what happened. Really? And then after we start talking, well, he did mention something about, And I'm like, okay, so why did we tune in? Check in is so important, and not keeping those layaways. I love that. I don't use it, but yeah, that's why keep a layaway, because then it explodes. And then here you are, no coat, no fire, nothing.
You don't wanna take one issue.
That's it.
That whole strongness, and that day you can have it all planned. You can be ready all day, you know, we're gonna do this, and on his ride home, he'd say one thing, and I'll take off what I had on and put on some sweats or something.
Whole night just thrown away.
So I was gonna say too, like, when you were talking about, work, and by the time you're like, you lose yourself in this here not paying your wife any attention because you're tired every day from this or that. And then, we talk about our one date night, and then something else comes up. So everything's always on the back burner, because I'm tired. And we just actually had that conversation 2 or 3 weeks ago about the time. Well, we talked about it because I said, so what day is Dee's day? What's my day? Because all these I never even said anything because I didn't say it bothered me, because I knew it was necessary for him, but I don't think he took into account how much time he was taking from me, so like you said, everything is put on layaway until you find the right time to tell them how you really feel,
Well, I think what worked for us is boundaries and access. We talked about, we would just answer our phone all the time, kids would call, we would always be available, so we had to set boundaries. You can't have access to somebody, that might be your uncle, your brother, your son, but our time is our time. So initially, it was a conflict, because we didn't get it, but the access to those boundaries. So we get so it caused a conflict in our relationships, because it's not something that we were used to in previous relationships. So what we did on Sunday, we calmed down. When we came home from church, we turned our phones off. It's not an emergency. Now everybody may not be able to do that yet, you may not be able to do that. But the point is, we found time to shout out everything else but us. And so we set those boundaries and only allow access if we want to. So it's beneficial.
So, just real quick in closing, because I know we gotta move on. We want to thank you guys once again just for having the trust in us to come here and talk and share. I think that God put all of us on this earth for a reason, right? And sometimes we don't know our purpose, right? We don't try to figure things out. But when you have sessions like this, you're able to. There's some things that I heard today that I can use from some of you guys, and hopefully you guys can do the same. But let's keep elevating. And then when you go home, have those honest conversations like, hey man, where we at? Are we in spring? Are we in summer? Are we in fall? Or are we in winter? It don't matter what season that you're in, right? It's where you want to be. You can create the environment that you want. But if you don't recognize where you at, you might stay in a season and you thought you was somewhere else. And then 5 or 10 more years went past. So we just thank you guys for listening. We thank Bishop and Pastor again for inviting us, and hope you guys got something out of it.
Thank you.
Okay, so we got one more session.